Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another MWO in Conversation With. It's really nice to see you. If you're joining from the band tonight on our Zoom call, you can ask any questions you may have in real time, and we'll endeavour to answer them. And of course, it's all being recorded, and it will go out on the members' Facebook page and onto YouTube as well. So if you're watching from the future, welcome as well. Today, we're going to be looking and discussing elements of the woodwind section and woodwind instruments roles within the wind band and specifically within our band. And I know that over the last few chats that we've done, members and non-members have enjoyed getting to know some of the members of the band and their background in music and where they've come from, and a bit of history about their own playing and their sort of roles within the ensemble. So we're going to be discussing that in quite an informal and colloquial way. And I'm really pleased to have two guests with me tonight. Kate Warriner, our principal flautist, and Sarah Queen, our principal clarinetist. So welcome to you both.
Thank you, Phil. Thanks, everybody.
There we go. There they are. So really, I think we because of the way the Zoom sort of works, maybe we'll sort of discuss this in turns. But before we move on to anything sort of really related to the band, I wonder if you could describe your musical backgrounds and education, and where you sort of started playing, how you progressed your musical education, and what has sort of brought you to the stage of playing that you're in now, just so members can find out a little bit more about yourselves. Kate,
do you want to go first?
I'm laughing because I don't know whether everyone else can see, but on my screen I can see Sarah's cat going in front of the camera.
Looking at the group chat, Gareth could see the cat. Yeah.
You see the fish in the background of mine, and there may be a cat that'll make an appearance in this house as well. So sorry if that happens. The joy of working from home for those that have been working from home and doing stuff at home for so long now. Okay, so I mean, I guess I started off at a very young age having piano lessons, and I think it was about 4, and come from quite a musical family. So my cousin is a really good pianist, and my grandfather was very musical, and his family was very musical, and so I think my mum was keen really that I had piano lessons at a young age. My piano teacher was terrible and I hated it, and so I gave up. And then I went into a music shop one day and was encouraged to, about the age of 7 I think, take piano lessons back up again. So I restarted my piano lessons, and I guess that's where it all started really. I then played guitar for a bit, and I played guitar in church as a child, and then I took up the flute, and I guess the flute became really my thing and my favourite instrument. Played flute and piano throughout school, and then ended up doing a degree in music. So I studied at Liverpool University, and studied flute and piano as my main instruments. And I guess really, you know, it was a passion I had and a talent, I suppose, I had at the time. Played in a number of ensembles as a teenager. So I played in the Liverpool Youth Orchestra, and I was principal flautist, which sounds very grand, but maybe not as grand as it sounds. Sarah might have some reflections on sitting in the opposite seat to that on clarinet. But had the real privilege really of doing a number of key things with the orchestra. So we toured around Prague, we toured around Hungary, and then I got the chance to play the Shamanov Flute Concerto with the orchestra, which I think at that point in my life was the second most terrifying thing I'd done after my driving test. But you know, that was a fabulous experience.
You didn't play flute whilst doing your driving test, did you?
No, I didn't. Oh. That would have probably been less terrifying, I think. Maybe more terrifying for the examiner and the audience.
And now we'll do some bay parking and some scales in thirds.
Yeah, something like that. So that was brilliant. And I guess through school, they found out that I played the piano, and so I got then the brilliant job actually being the school accompanist. So I used to do all the choirs and used to do all the shows and stuff. So that was great fun. And I think some of my big inspirations really in music were some of my teachers throughout, particularly secondary school. So big shout out to Jean Marco, who some of you may know. So she was my music mentor really throughout secondary school. And then obviously landed at uni, did my degree in music, and then partway through my degree got this job in the NHS, and then landed this like crazy career that I'd never really planned in the NHS. I'm still in the NHS now. And then, you know, met Phil through Maghull Wind Orchestra, and I joined Maghull through a GP that I worked with, so David Reed, who was a baritone player, who came in one day and said, oh, I'm in this group and they could do with some flute players, do you fancy coming along? Joined MWO, and the rest is history there really. That was in 2005 and Chris and I joined in the same year. So yeah, 15 years ago. So
I think word of mouth still is one of the sort of best ways of advertising the ensemble as well, isn't it? You know, musical friends and people that you maybe don't realise play a musical instrument, and you find out, oh, well, I play in a band, you know, will you come along and play too? And then from joining the band, then you decided to take up playing saxophone, because you had saxophone lessons with me for a while, didn't you?
Well, and there's a story that goes with that one as well, Phil.
Yes, go on, then.
I think we had some kinds of social drinking in our house one night when social drinking was still very much allowed, and we had a bit of a music night that went along with that, and you brought a saxophone along and I sat on the piano, and then I was like, after a few glasses of wine, right, get me to grade 8 within a year was, I think, the gauntlet I laid down, and you were like, yeah, no problem, let's go for it. Yeah, and so then, yeah, took up the saxophone.
Yeah, great. You see, and you started off, you know, I took piano lessons and didn't get on with the teacher. The teacher was awful. But then with the right teacher, grade 8 in a year, you see, no problem at all.
Yeah, and I think one of my interesting things in sax, actually, and I can remember coming to a lesson in your house and we were doing, you'll remember this as well, the jazz scales, and it was learning sort of the rhythm of jazz and stuff, which as a classically trained musician absolutely blew my mind, because I think seeing you know, Mozart or Bach or the stuff I was really used to playing and nimble around the flute, actually then, you know, this whole kind of jazz thing was like, what on earth is this nonsense? Phil's like,
this nonsense. I've made a career out of that nonsense, I'll have you know.
And I remember at one point then saying, you're going to just have to leave me. And I almost had this almost moment, which is like, I can't carry this on right now. I just need a little moment to work this out a little bit. Let's come back next week and regroup on it. So, and
I think that's good for you as a musician, isn't it? You know, the versatility of going from playing Bach sonatas and Mozart sonatas on the flute and Beethoven on the piano and things, to then having the versatility of being able to sit in a saxophone section in a big band or play jazzy arrangement for saxophone quartets and things, and having that knowledge of different genres and different instruments, I think is very important, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that later on. But talking of teaching and students, you know, it gives me great pleasure as the conductor of MWO to welcome students into the orchestra, and Sarah joined when, I don't know if I was teaching you or maybe just slightly before I was teaching you, but you did your teenage years sort of being taught by me and playing in the band as well. Yeah. Again, sort of starting from quite a young age. So what's your sort of progression through to where you've got to now?
So I started off actually very similarly to you, Kate. I started with piano as well. So again, coming from quite a musical family, my grandma was actually a piano teacher. So I had free piano lessons from the age of 5, but because
only 3 of them.
Well, in fairness, but I think because it was my grandmother, I used to sulk quite a bit. If I didn't get it quickly, I would get in a strop, and because it was my grandma and the lessons are free, I could go on in a strop. So I was very on and off with piano over the years, and it never glued with me. I'm just not a natural pianist, and I don't like doing stuff that I'm not naturally good at. So I gave it up. But I started recorder when I was probably about 7 in school, just as part of a whole class thing, and loved it. So joined recorder club.
I mentioned in one of these other chats, I got thrown out of recorder club at primary school for improvising.
Doesn't surprise me.
I have bad memories of recorder club.
He seen you coming, Phil, didn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I very fondly remember recorders, and I still have quite a sweet spot for them. I hate listening to them; they are the worst. But I do quite enjoy getting recorders out. I've got a full set because I'm a nerd. But they come in handy every now and then in musical theatre. But we were offered probably around year 5's age 9 the opportunity to take up either a wind, brass or string instrument. So I chose the clarinet because a girl that I really admired in the year above me played clarinet, and there was literally no other reason other than I wanted to be like her. Not because I like the sound of it or anything, but
I think there's something in that, isn't there? I think we look up to other musicians, and you see,
massively,
you know,
yeah.
I remember looking at saxophone players, thinking, wow, that just looks so cool. I want to be a saxophone player. I think, and it wasn't because I was overly into listening to music at that time. I think there was just an aspiration to be kind of playing music, and that just seemed like a lifestyle that I wanted a bit of. Yeah, so I think that's, you know, that kind of role model and that aspiration thing goes a long way. And I know when I joined MWO when I was younger and playing clarinet, I'd look at all these adult musicians and I think, gosh, I want to be able to play like them, you know, and I want to be able to do this sort of thing. You know, it's a big part of it, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, and it's a huge part of, you know, of my musical experience. That's, you know, how I started clarinet, and you know, and then I just went through with school lessons, and probably when I got to about 14, my best friend in school at the time, Ellie Richards, who has come back recently, she was currently having flute lessons with a member of the band and was going to band herself with her mum. And because they live around the corner from me and we were best friends, she said, oh, why don't you come along? And I managed to persuade my mum. I remember having to properly persuade because it was such a late night for a school night.
School night, yeah.
Because this was back in the time where we had a break in the middle and we'd all go to the bar, and then we'd go back and play a bit more, and then we'd go back to the bar again at the end. And
yeah,
we didn't leave until 11 o'clock. Yeah.
Theme to this conversation, isn't it?
Yeah, so it was a late night for a school night, but yes, I think I was 14, so that would have made it about 2006 when I joined.
Yeah, it's interesting because the chat I had with Bill a couple of weeks ago about the development of the band, and we were discussing how, you know, as a child, I'd be sort of involved in all this adult thing, and yeah, the fact it was a late night on a school night, it was exciting, you know, and you know, going into the little room for the committee meetings and hanging around and things like that, you know, this whole other world other than school and sort of the usual things you do as a child, you find is out there, don't you? And you suddenly think, gosh, I'm part of this. And it is, it's a real sort of, it's kind of a buzz from just being out there doing it, not just playing, just the social side of it and the experience of it as well.
And it's one of the things I love about the band, because you do get sat next to people who you never normally would have had a conversation with. But I sat for many years next to Mal in the kind of third and second clarinet section, and I remember sitting next to him thinking, oh, he really knows his stuff. I need to be as good as this guy. And it's lovely because we, as you know, I struck up a very nice friendship with Mal and have known him now for 15 odd years, you know, and you know, and friendships from the band have obviously grown because I'm very dear friends with many of the people in the band, but also, you know, a lot of you will know. So Adam and I are due to be married, and we got together through the band. So we do, yeah, we owe a lot to the band.
And it's nice that you know, like some others have gone away to university, studied music, and then come back and moved back into the sort of local area and returned back to the band. Same with Adam as well, actually, although he wasn't in the band beforehand, but coming back into the area and you know, you're looking for an outlet to play and a chance to play regularly and things. So it's nice to see people coming back into the band in that way. And, you know, nowadays, music, once you've gone through that education system and you've gone away and you've done your degree, whether you've studied music or not, but every member of the band seems to have a different sort of way in which music plays a part in their life. And obviously Kate's gone to work in the NHS, but is still very, very musical. I've got a career within music, and you the same have gone into the sort of music as a career as well, haven't you?
Yeah, so yeah, I did my music degree at the University of Leeds and didn't really know what I wanted to do, so did a PGCE because I thought I'll just do some teaching because I've always enjoyed working with children and I've done quite a lot of experience there anyway. So did a PGCE in secondary music education.
I think it will be from when you were helping me out with the junior woodwind ensembles and had this natural gift for sort of music education. I think that was a nice period within youth music, wasn't it? You know,
It
where
was lovely.
we sort of worked collaboratively together. Yeah, and sort of. I wonder if your love of music education sort of grew out of being involved in it and then mentoring younger students as well, perhaps.
Yeah, very, very possibly. And
Yeah.
and yeah, and all the way through kind of my teaching career, even though I don't do it now, ensemble music playing was always at the very heart of what I try to instill.
Yeah.
Because it's not just about listening to music and playing music on your own. It's ensemble music making is the most joyous thing.
Which again, if you're watching and you want to listen back with Sarah Lofthouse and myself, we were discussing our views on music education, and we were saying exactly the same things. How that ensemble music is absolutely key to learning, and getting involved in an ensemble very early on is key. And what I like about MWO is the fact that we do mentor the other musicians. You know, when we get less experienced musicians of any age, the more experienced musicians sort of mentor them and look after them and bring everybody on together, which is lovely. And what's your role now, Sarah? Because I mean, I know, but our viewers don't, and I'm sure they'd be interested to hear.
Yes, so I currently work in the Liverpool Philharmonic, or Royal Liverpool Philharmonic, as I should say. So I coordinate a musical education programme, which is called In Harmony Liverpool, and it's a semi-government funded, Arts Council England funded project, which works with children from poor socioeconomic backgrounds. So it specifically works in West Everton and Anfield. And we've got 3 schools on the programme, and basically every child gets a completely immersive music education throughout their primary career, from as soon as they start at nursery right the way through to when they finish at year 6. And when they get to year 3, they all get to learn a string instrument, and they have 2 lessons a week, and they have orchestra every Friday, and they don't pay for anything. We provide absolutely all the instruments, all the music lessons, everything is paid for. And then we offer them extracurricular as well. So we've got various little string groups, we have orchestras, and then when they get to year 5, they can choose to go off onto a different route. So if they want to go down woodwind or brass or percussion, then they can do. And again, we provide everything for them, and we then get a symphony orchestra by the time they get to year 5. And every year they will perform in the Liverpool Philharmonic Hall as part of their annual concert. So I'm responsible for kind of all the backstage running of the programme. I don't actually deliver anything. I'm purely administrative in my role, which is something I chose to step away from, the actual music education delivery, and work backstage. So I do a lot of I do all the instrument maintenance and auditing. So just last week I tuned something like 500 string instruments.
Can't be done. Can't be done.
Yeah, my fingers are shot.
I mean, it's a whole different conversation chatting to you about that project, really, especially during a pandemic, and how you're going to continue to run that. Yeah. Maybe we'll have you back and have a chat about that and sort of music in the community at some point. But just briefly, before we go on to things a little bit more related to our sections within the band, Kate, how does music now play a role in your life? I mean, obviously you've got a rather splendid career in the NHS, but as a sideline to that, you've still, I still think of you as a musician probably more than your actual job role, I think.
Oh, thank you. I mean, I think music plays a massive part in my life. And I think Maghull Orchestra is a big part of that, along with other groups that I'm part of, so big bands, saxophone quartets, etc. I think you know, as I say, one of the biggies really is the music side of the wind orchestra, but also then the committee side of the wind orchestra. And so I chair our brilliant committee to, you know, help Phil and others really with the leadership of the group. And you know, that's, I think certainly during the pandemic, I think the committee has met really regularly and really aim to do lots of brilliant stuff for our members. So I think, you know, that's a current key thing. I think just on the role bit, so for those that aren't aware, so I have a leadership role in 2 local hospitals. So I work in Alderhay and I also work at Liverpool Heart and Chest Hospital. And have responsibility for the digital technology that runs in both those hospitals. But a real delight probably for the 3 of us actually was something that we were able to do with the Wind Orchestra and some of the friends on Christmas Day. So we had a really lovely morning going around the wards at Alderhay with a makeshift band playing carols for all the children and young people and relatives really in Alderhay. And I guess, you know, no one could have predicted the pandemic, and who knows what will happen this year. But, you know, I think bringing music into the workplace, and certainly, you know, the joy music can bring to unwell individuals, and certainly what we saw at Christmas was the impact, what we could do and what we could bring together with our collective skills and talents for our fab children was just unbelievable.
Music has a hugely therapeutic benefit as well, both listening and playing. And I'm not talking there about music therapy, but just music as a therapeutic process, you know, and it really, really is important. And I think with all our members from the orchestra, whatever walk of life they're from and whatever they do for a day job, if you like, you know, I tend to think of us all as musicians, because if you are a musician, you are a musician, whether you do that as your full-time profession or not, and whether you just enjoy it as a hobby. And at whatever level you play at, once you are a musician, that's it, you are, and you sort of act differently towards things, you listen differently, and you definitely think differently towards the music and the making of music.
I think for me, you know, having a busy job, the music is a real release, and it's something where you sit in an ensemble, you sit in Team Maghull Wind Orchestra, and it takes your head completely out of work, because actually what you're focusing on is the dots on the page, playing with your mates, and you know, making great music together, and it's a real distraction, and it's great for friendship, and you know, I think we've got, you know, Sarah's not here and Adam, but you know, we've got lasting friendships that are really strong through the Wind Orchestra. And it is a real team game, isn't it, that we're lucky to have on our doorstep.
Yeah, I think so. I was only thinking today actually, and this thought has crossed my mind a few times, but as I opened my saxophone case to get my sax out to practice today, because I do try and practice every day, I was very aware of the buzz I get from just getting the instrument out, you know, and that happens every single day. Every time I get my saxophone out, I never feel, oh, I don't really want to play this today, you know. Now, I'm lucky because I do get to play every day. Members of the band may only be able to get their instrument out once a week, but I hope that Tuesday night and the opening of the case gives them that same kind of buzz as I get. And I would think it does, you know, because otherwise people wouldn't be going and we wouldn't be joining in. When we think about the sections of the band, obviously, Kate, you're leading our flute section, Sarah, you're leading our clarinet section. What do you think are the main challenges within your section, from leading it and from sort of within the section and making a section work together? So
I think for the clarinets, because we are probably the biggest section in the band of just the one instrument, and to be honest, even when you include bass clarinets, I think we are the biggest section. We have the most members.
You've got a choir, clarinet choir.
Basically, well, which is a brilliant thing.
Well, before COVID struck, that was my next project, the Northwest Clarinet Choir. So it will happen again in the future, I promise.
So we do all, you know, so we form a huge bulk of the band, and that will bring its challenges, of course, because as the most people, we're going to have the most diversity in terms of musical experience and probably in ability and just being at ease with the dots. And I think it's about us all coming together as a section and not focusing too hard on being better than someone, or trying to get yourself to this. Obviously you should always strive to do as best as you can, but it's not about feeling bad because you're not as good as that person there, because there's so many people.
Yeah, I think the thing about that is you should always strive to be that little bit better than you were personally yesterday. So the only person you should be in competition with is yourself, really, isn't there? Because there's always going to be all levels of players at all levels of the profession. And the only person you should be in competition with is yourself. And as long as you are getting that little bit better each time, that's all that really matters, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, our poor third clarinet section get picked on a lot. But
I would never do that.
But I think the third clarinets get some of the worst parts. They really do. As a clarinet section, if we're playing anything that's come from an orchestral score originally, immediately the clarinet section becomes the strings. And string players don't need to breathe.
I'll tell you where you get some terrible clarinet writing. It's that composer Adam
Leggerline's
yeah, exactly. Likes a high semiquaver, doesn't he, for the clarinets?
Nice bracket flute parts, though. Leave him alone.
You get all the nice tunes. It's different.
I know.
So, Kate, how do you feel things work in your flute section, which again is an interesting section, like the clarinets, really, because obviously, apart from having a piccolo, it's just lots and lots of flutes. It's not like you've got sort of altos, ones, twos, tenors, and baritones like in the sax section. There's an awful lot of the same instrument playing, hopefully, the same pitch and timbre. How do you sort of lead that?
I mean, I think probably similar to clarinet, flute is a very popular instrument. And I guess, reflecting on how we both got into music, they're the kind of instruments that are offered in school if it's not a violin, but we do prefer our woodwind to our strings, obviously. And I think in terms of challenges within the section, I think it's one around really encouraging people to have the confidence in their own playing and their own ability. I think as a section leader, there's something around keeping an ear out for what's going on your row, what's going on behind, and then tweaking little things really that might be a little bit out of kilter with what we're doing. I think in terms of the flute, probably one of the main challenges of the flute as an instrument is intonation. So, often you can be a bit out at the top and a bit out at the bottom, and the middle's normally okay, but actually then, putting a gang of flutes together and getting that, sectional sound, that takes a bit of doing, and I think a bit of leadership really from the leader of the section. And I guess the other bit from a sectional perspective is then doing flute music, probably similar to clarinet music really, but we'll have a lot of kind of sometimes razor fast semi-quaver passages, which obviously the brass can't play, so they don't get. But then keeping that tight together, and I think that there's something around giving quite clear and strong leadership to then be able to get the section to follow, but then in a way that you don't stick out. Because the togetherness, there's nothing worse than a section that's then got a section leader that's 50 times volume higher than everybody else, because the blend is lacking.
Yeah, I think it's leading by example, isn't it? And having, really clear articulation and phrasing, and so that people can use their ears and try and latch onto that, and not so much follow, but more kind of emulate and play in that style. It's having that top voice of the section where you want to try and match up with that. So then as a whole section, all the musicians within it know where they're going and how they're trying to phrase the music, because with the best will in the world, two musicians will have a different idea of phrasing. So we sort of work on that in rehearsal, and I'll put my interpretation across to the band, but then really you've got to try and phrase as a section and phrase together and make sure you're accenting in the same way, and you've got shorts and longs in the same way. And I found that's quite interesting recently over all the sort of projects that I've done remote recording, because you send off your part, you phrase it in perhaps a slightly different way to somebody else's part. And you know, if we're with the MWO lockdown videos we're doing, along with the guide tracks, you know, it's obviously a computer generated guide track, so you don't quite get the human phrasing there. And I'm actually quite amazed at how well phrased things seem to come out and across, really. But in real life, we're listening for that lead player of trying to phrase the same, like the top of the section. And I always think that the lead players of the sections should be quite responsible for dynamic contrast as well. I once played in a big band where the lead alto player said to me, right, if it's quiet, I lean forward and I play quietly. And if it's loud, I lean back. And he would actually give kind of visible clues as well, which was actually quite useful, really.
One of the interesting things though, that, and it doesn't happen so much now, but a few years ago in MWO, there'd be I think almost a responsibility not of the lead player to count the rests. So then a bit of a stressful situation, which is like, you know, counting your rests, thinking, oh God, like, let's hope I'm not out, because if I'm out, or if I miss an entry, or if I come in early, everyone will follow you.
Who is designated counter for your section? Yeah, I mean, that's the other thing. I mean, that sort of speaks to people who are playing within the sections. You've got to be confident, and if the lead player isn't playing but you think it's where it is, you've got to go for it, you know, because although we're following lead players to get an idea of phrasing and articulation, we can't be relying on anybody else. You know, we've all got to take ownership of it ourselves, and you can't rely and go, well, the first player didn't play, so I didn't bother. You know, everybody's got to be sort of taking ownership of their own music.
I think, I mean, another key thing, I think, in terms of the section leader in our role, and I think we touched on it a little bit earlier, but maybe worth exploring a bit more. It's the developing our young talent, and obviously, Sarah, I can't believe you were 14 in that year. Makes me feel quite old. But you know, thinking around like yourself and others, and then others that we've brought through, actually our role really is to spot that talent and to give our young people an opportunity to have a go at the solos, and really help their playing come along and help their confidence come along in the ensemble by giving them that exposure and experience that you wouldn't necessarily get in such a brilliant wind orchestra.
I mean, the band just has success story after success story of young musician who's joined on, you know, 9th flute or 77th clarinet, and work their way up the section and come onto the front row, or if the band was very unlucky, ended up on the podium like me. But we just have so many success stories like that, which shows how playing in a band all together like that actually makes things work. And there we've been talking about sections sort of working as sections independently, but of course the flutes and clarinets play a lot together as well. And how do you match those two sections together?
I think
we have a lot of eye contact, Sarah, don't we?
We do. There's a lot of eyes across the band, and I think for those kind of things, because it is keeping an eye out to make sure that you're matching phrasing, because you can communicate that through your body language when you're playing. It's not just about listening, it's about watching as well. And I think, you know, if something's been orchestrated where, say, we're playing the exact same thing, there's been a decision there that is a texture that they want. It's not that they want to necessarily hear, you know, this timbre and this timbre. It's about mixing, and it's not sticking out, which I think sometimes, especially if you're trying to compete with, say, the brass section, if you've got the same line as a trumpet, for example, it's not about trying to get your line heard. It's about creating a texture, because a composer, you would assume, wouldn't put this exact same thing on two different instruments and expect them to both be super, super clear. I think it's a textural decision. You have to make sure that you're blending, which is a little easier for us on the front row.
That's right.
with each other.
Sometimes it's an idea of interpretation as well, isn't it? Sometimes I'll say, well, listen, the horns and the alto saxophones and the clarinets have got this unison passage, but I want it to sound more woody than sort of brassy, you know, and sort of bring that out and tuck that away a little bit. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It's about sort of working together to create something that's larger than the sum of its parts, really. And I always think of balance as a nice kind of dome, you know, like a dome over the band, and nobody's kind of just sticking out of the dome. It's all nice and contained and careful, because otherwise, yeah, like Kate was saying, if the lead players stick out too much, well, you've lost everything that's underneath it supporting it. And yeah, it's that sort of change in timbre. Would you agree with that, Kate?
Yeah, and I think it's whenever you've got a similar line to any other section in the band, really. You know, it's that really listening out for who you with. How does that need to then just stick together and not stick out as individual parts? And I think the other interesting bit, and I guess between the flutes and the clarinets, there's a lot of like question and answer kinds of things that will be, you know, written into various pieces. And again, it's how we work as a team. You know, using the word team tonight, but it is a bit of a team sport, really, isn't it? And it's how then we work together and listen out for the phrasing, listen out for the style, and respond, or the other way round, depending on who's got the leading part of that.
One of my favourite questions to ask in rehearsal of a section is, who else is playing this line with you? You know, and of course I know because I've got the score in front of me, but it's amazing how many people have blocked out everything that's going on around them and they're just playing their part. And as soon as you go, well, that's with the trombones, they go, oh, well, you'll never hear us then. I mean, they go, right, lovely, I'll match that perfectly. And yeah.
And often with that, Phil, I'll write on my part with trumpet or with whoever it is, just so that then, you know, if you forget, actually you've got a little cue, a little memory note that then says, oh, make sure you listen out for whoever you're with, or whichever point in the music it is.
Yeah. And what you were saying with, in terms of, you know, it's if you decide you want something to sound more woody or more saxophone led, or, you know, that is the conductor's decision. And, you know, on those occasions where you do that, again, I tried to write on my music, you know, like lead this or stay underneath whoever else it is. It's really important to if it's been pointed out, to be aware of it in the future.
Yeah, there's nothing more frustrating for a conductor than saying the same sort of interpretation thing week after week after week, you know. So yeah, it is very important to mark the parts.
And with the best will in the world, no matter how many times you play a piece, because our repertoire is so large, you never remember everything. So you know, I think we sound like classroom SWATs here, but it is really important, isn't it, to do that? Otherwise, you'll just keep rehearsing the same thing over and over again, and then, you know, not getting it right. And those that have noted their parts with whatever the instruction is, when then others perhaps don't, you know, it can be a bit frustrating, I guess. So that'd probably be a top tip from us, wouldn't it?
Yeah, you don't have to bring a whole pencil case, just a pencil.
And you do need your own pencil in COVID times. Sorry.
As we think about returning back to socially distant rehearsals, yeah, everybody will have to bring their own pencil. One of the parts of my career is obviously being a woodwind doubler, and you know, I play saxophone, clarinet and flute, as most people realise, and I teach those instruments. And the majority of my teaching now is teaching very good clarinet players to also play saxophone, or very good saxophone players to also play clarinet or the flute or a variation of, you know. And the three of us are all flautists, saxophonists, and in Sarah's case, a clarinet player as well. So Sarah's got all three. Kate, you obviously got your piano, but you play saxophone and flute. I wonder if this sort of idea of doubling on woodwind instruments, becoming a much more sort of versatile woodwind musician, gives you a greater appreciation for the other sections and what they're trying to achieve. I know from a conducting point of view, my limited ability on sort of percussion and brass just gives me enough of an idea of what is fairly easy to play on a brass instrument and what is actually technically quite difficult. You know, I wonder how that works for you within your woodwind playing, and how that translates to how you think about leading your sections.
Yeah, I mean, when I was in university, I auditioned for the symphonic wind band, and I auditioned on clarinet, doubling E flat, and flute. And I was a complete self-taught flautist. I'd kind of borrowed my friend's first ever flute that she had when I was about 14 and taught myself at home. But I thought I'll just audition on the off chance, because you never know. And I actually got placed in the auditioned wind orchestra on second flute, doubling E flat clarinet.
Gosh, that's a hard
I know, which was a huge surprise to me, but it means that I did actually get an opportunity to play in a competitively good wind orchestra on flute, which was something I'd never done at that point. And that helped me hugely in kind of appreciating, just as you said before, Kate, there's so many semi-quavers all the time. And you know, flutes really are there to put all the pretty bits in and all of the bells and whistles. And whilst we get that in the clarinet section, I think it's even more so in the flutes. So that definitely helped me. And I remember coming back from university just for a summer maybe, and for whatever reason, I'd picked up a tenor horn, and I sat in the horn section just for maybe 2 or 3 weeks, but learned how to, you know, I was having to transpose on site, which was something I didn't normally have to do. And
it's very hard when you put yourself on a different instrument. I remember when I was teaching for Sefton, I played tuba in the youth brass band, and I could get around this tuba, and you know, I felt I could read music and I could follow a conductor and I could do all the things you expect of a musician. And I sat in the youth brass band trying to play these tuba parts, and found myself thinking so much about how to actually play this instrument that I got lost in the music. I mean, I hadn't been lost in music for about 20 years. And I had to turn to the little 11-year-old child sat next to me and go, "Hey, mate, where are we up to?" And he went, "There, sir." "Oh, thanks." And I carried on. It gives you a whole different sort of outlook. Now, I'm not suggesting that when we do return to rehearsals, everybody turns up on a Tuesday night playing a different instrument. You know, we're not Adam Dutch. Calm down.
Your mum would be delighted for some help in the tuba section.
Not for me.
And we do have 2 tubas now, so.
Well, an excess of tubas. Yeah, great.
An excess by 2.
Kate, how have you found your sort of saxophone doubling? Has that given you a new appreciation for what our sax section has to do?
No, it absolutely does. And I'm actually recalling a concert we did many moons ago, and I actually played soprano sax in the trumpet section because I think we were a bit low on trumpets, which is random, isn't it? But I think what it gives you actually is just an appreciation of how different people's parts are, and then what's expected in different sections, as well as then the challenges of the different instruments. And that was a really interesting experience to then see, because often the flutes and trumpets will have, you know, similar melody lines, so you can then just see then, you know, the difference in how some of the trumpet stuff was scored, played on, and soprano, to then what the flutes were playing from the front. And I think in sax, and I've not done much sax wind orchestra playing, but I think certainly in terms of the versatility and the expectations of the instruments it does. I think one of the challenges I find as a not, you know, I'm probably one of the once a week players, other than then if we've got, you know, various big band stuff going on, but you know, certainly then coming in on the big bands, actually swapping from one instrument to the other from an embouchure perspective. So if we're on sax all night and then suddenly there's something with really, really high flute parts that needs, you know, a totally different technique, you kind of like, oh my God, it's like, you know, getting that change in can often be quite a little challenge, you know, at the end of a hard blow on a gig. So and I guess that's just interesting.
Yeah, I play saxophone and clarinet every day, and I don't play as much flute as perhaps I once did. But if I do get a session on flute, I have to do quite a lot of practice to get it feeling as natural as my saxophone and my clarinet feels. You know, I have to play it quite a lot in the lead up to that. Like, I call it prescribed practice. You know, so I've just got to do it. And you know, I'm from a conductor's point of view, and I've discussed this with Adam Dutch many times, from a composer's point of view, and we've discussed it on these kind of platforms as well. Having that knowledge of the different instruments and what is possible on them, what ranges they've got, how the music tends to be written, because it is written very, very differently. We've already just discussed the differences between the flutes and the clarinets, the lines they play. Having that sort of good sort of knowledge of everything that's going on within the band, I think is really essential for section leaders, just as it is for people who are going to conduct or write music for wind band as well. It gives you that sort of real sort of versatility to everything you're doing, and you can appreciate it and put that onto your own playing, or into your own playing, I should say. And we're just going to finish for the next few minutes on, I'm wondering if you've got any practice tips or warm-ups or technical advice for other members of your section, whether this is things that you have been taught, or things that you like to do, or things you feel are particularly important about with your instruments. Tips, practice ideas for warm-ups, things like that, either for, you know, somebody who's playing every day, or somebody who is just coming to band and they maybe haven't had a chance to practice as much as they'd like. What's the sort of advice to members within your section?
Want me to go first?
Yes.
Okay, so I think I probably need to confess I don't really do loads of practice. You probably guessed. However,
well, the thing is, though, you have done in the past.
I have, yeah.
Throughout your musical education, your degree, you will have been practicing a lot. So you've put the hours in to get you to the standard you're at now. How do you manage to maintain that?
Well, I would actually share some earlier tips before I probably come to answering that. So I think on the flute, I think one of the key things really is the sound that you produce, and then the projection that you make. I think it's probably one of the more difficult instruments to get a really good, really fat tone quality on. And I was taught a bit of a trick by an old flute teacher, which was to play a low C, and then harmonic up to the next C, and keep harmonicking up as far as you can go, which I think you probably get up to a top G, but with the low C fingering, and then come down again as a bit of a sort of 5-10 minute warm-up exercise. And I probably started doing that when I swapped flute teachers during my A-levels, so I was a pretty nimble player, but my tone quality was, it could be variable sometimes, and that was one of the things that she really wanted to work on with me, and it was one of the things I worked on in university. So that would probably be a tone quality tip. I think any teacher will talk about diaphragm. So I think, again, with the flute, having really good diaphragm control to help you breathe in is really important. And then I think probably my third thing would be on some of the more tricky passages, slow them right down, do them with a metronome, speed them up, but also play them backwards. And that was a trick, just studying really tricky things. Actually, if you can then play something backwards, start it slow, build it up, and then playing it forwards again is so much easier. And I'm sure there's some kind of weird science behind that, but it does work, I promise you.
Yeah, the reason that works is because as you play something forward, your brain gets used to reading it, and it kind of turns off and stops learning. So then when you play it backwards, your brain switches that, and suddenly it becomes very hard again, very difficult, and you have to really focus in on the notes. And then when you play it the correct way round again, it feels really easy because you've just made it feel incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
And another little practice thing I really enjoy is, if you've got a difficult phrase, play the last note of the phrase, just the last note of the phrase, then play the note before it. So you've got the penultimate note and the ultimate note, and then the next note back. So you're working one note back each time, which means you're always going towards music that you can always play, rather than going into music, you can't, which is like banging your head against a brick wall. So you get that bonus of, oh, I can play this bit. Oh, it's hard, but I can play this bit. Oh, that note's hard, but I can play that bit. So working backwards, a note at a time for a phrase. And anybody who's ever had a lesson with me will have done things like that. And in fact, I think I've probably done it with the whole band on occasion, you know, play that note, right, 2 notes, 3 notes, you know, and because you're always working to material you can play, it feels much easier. Yeah, and you get a real sort of buzz out of that because you're doing something you can, or going into something you can do.
I think I would also say, so on the topic of scales, which I know is a passion of yours, Phil.
A little bit.
So when I started flute, so for anyone who does play piano, actually, I think piano is a really good grounding for any instrument. And I would always encourage, particularly young people, but older people as well, you know, get a basic go around the piano because it does give you a really good music grounding. I used to visualize the scales on the piano when I was doing them on flute, and I just helped a visualization. I found a visualization thing just helped me be able to then play what I couldn't see on the flute, because I think transitioning for something that you can see in front of you to then something that you can't see, it just was a little trick that helped me through all my grades on flute. So yeah.
Great.
And in terms of now, I think for me, you know, I've probably had quite a good grounding of some fabulous teachers, and you know, taught, you know, technique, how to produce a good sound, and it's just it's that becoming part of your natural how you play your instrument, that I think is, I'm fortunate that I've got that. I do still, you know, there'll be the odd corners where I'll think, oh God, that's a tricky passage, I need to get that under my fingers, and certainly with the big band music, some tricky big band part, or, you know, I guess saxophone is probably more secondary instrument to me than flute, but similar tactics that we've just described.
Yeah, great, thanks, Kate. Sarah, any top tips?
It depends for what it's for, I suppose, but I suppose my biggest tip, because again, I'm like Kate, I don't practice anymore, really. If I've got some kind of gig coming up and I know for a fact that I can't do a bit, then I will practice, but otherwise I just don't find the time. But what I did used to always love doing is breaking up my practice with things that I really enjoyed playing, so I wouldn't just focus on what I do now, which is a bit that I can't play. I would always make sure that I'm breaking it up, and even if I haven't got that bit yet, I'll then go and play something that's easier and that I really love playing,
because
and then I'll go back to it.
Yeah, you've got to remember we're playing music because we enjoy it.
Exactly.
You know? So, and I like the idea of breaking the practice up like that. I always encourage people to play something they enjoy playing and they find easy to play at the end of the practice session, because then you leave on a real high going, yeah, I can play my kazoo.
Yeah, I do that anyway.
Yeah, yeah, it's very, very important. But I like the idea of breaking it up like that. That's nice.
Yeah, and I think, again, depending on what you're trying to practice for, but one of my best skills, one of the things I think I'm probably best at, is my sight reading skills, you know, which has, you could argue, made me a lazy player in that I don't practice because I don't need to that often, because I'm able to sight read at a reasonably high standard, but then that makes me lazy, and that means that once I've sight read it, that's probably the best it's going to get. But I'm good at sight reading because I practiced it. You know, when I was growing up, I used to love just going online, going on IMSLP, finding a random score, and I'd stick the recording on and I'd play along with it.
Yeah.
And, you know, I would have never heard the piece of music before. I'd end up playing up to all sorts of weird stuff. But practicing sight reading is actually a thing you wouldn't necessarily think to do. I think you'd get into a habit of practicing your familiar territory. But practicing sight reading is a huge help in terms of developing that as a skill, which then in turn helps whenever we're in band. So
it's a very important skill, and just like learning to play a musical instrument needs to be practiced, which is why we try and do some sight reading in band rehearsals. You know, I'll bring out a score and I'll say, right, we're going to play from the top to the bottom of this. if anybody gets lost, put your hand up, or if it all falls to bits, we'll stop and we'll just say, right, we're going back to this rehearsal letter and we're carrying on. And, you know, drag everybody through some sight reading altogether. I think that's a very, very important skill to develop. And the idea of playing along, and there's so many resources now to play along with scores and things, you know, I think that's a really nice idea. I think the two things I'd just maybe add to that for our members particularly, your most important asset is your tone quality. So it doesn't matter how many notes you can play or how fast you can play them, but you've got to make them sound as beautiful as you can. Your tone is your main asset, because nobody wants to listen to an instrument that doesn't sound nice. You know, doesn't matter if you can play really fast or really high or whatever. It's the sound, the tone quality you make is so important. And everything that you do, you must do with a sense of pulse. And have a sense of time in your head all the time. Whether you're just playing long notes, count yourself in and have an idea of a sense of pulse just by playing long notes. If you're playing scales, play them in a metronomic way. If you're playing something from a piece of music, again, set up that pulse first. If you're sight reading, count yourself in before you go. Make sure you have a sense of pulse to everything you do, because that's like the heartbeat of our music. And if we had every member of the band all playing rubato, we would not sound like an ensemble at all.
I remember, sorry, but when we had lessons, one of the first things you did with me, I remember very fondly, is playing a long note and getting the other person to guess the tempo.
Yes.
And it sounds like it doesn't make sense. It sounds like it's not a thing.
Yeah.
But we would do it with the back and forth, and it always worked. It was brilliant.
It's incredible. If you set up that tempo, that pulse in your head, you could hear it in the sustained tone, and the other person can clap along. Yeah. I can remember that lesson very vividly. You're like, all right then, here we go. And I clap a pulse, and you're like, oh my goodness, that's right. Yeah.
Sounds good. 2008.
Yeah.
Never done that in my saxophone lessons, Phil.
Find a mate and play them a long note and see if they know what pulse you're doing. It does it.
It's remarkable.
It's incredible. And you know, that's what music is about, because music always has that forward direction and that drive, even if it's a long note. I talk in band about notes just stagnating and going, nah, you know, rather than ba, you know, which has got some sort of direction and some vibe. And I think, you know, with that idea of musical direction, I think it's a nice place to leave it. So thank you very much to my guests, Sarah Queen and Kate Warriner. It's been a delight to talk to you both. A big thanks to Chris Horswood, who's working behind the scenes on all the technical side of things and sorting out the recording from us. Thanks to everybody who's tuned in tonight. Thanks to anybody who's watching in the future. And I look forward to seeing you again when I have a chat to some of the brass musicians in a couple of weeks. Until then, stay safe, take care of yourselves, and we'll see you again very soon. Thank you very much. Good night.